Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. The night rain drowned Chicago in silver light as Grace Moreno, a young art student, ran through the storm clutching her sketchbook. Her rideshare canceled, her phone was dead, and the only light she saw came from a glowing sign, the Marlowe Lounge. Inside, everything fell silent the moment she entered. Eyes followed her every step, and then she saw Luca De Lorenzo, the man who owned the room, without saying a word. His dark gaze lingered, assessing, dangerous. When she turned to leave, his voice stopped her, calm, commanding, with a soft Italian edge. "No one walks into my club by accident." Then to his men, "She stays." That night changed everything. What began as shelter from the storm became a descent into Luca's world. A world built on secrets, loyalty, and blood. Grace should have run, but something in him, the quiet sadness behind his power, kept her there. He called her his light. She called him her darkness. And when violence came for them both, they learned that even in a city of sins, some storms are worth surviving together. The storm over Chicago wasn't just weather, it was a living thing. Wind tore through the streets, howling like it was chasing something, and rain slammed against glass towers until the whole city shimmered like a mirage. Lightning split the sky, revealing flashes of wet asphalt, shuttered shops, and lonely headlights fighting the darkness. Among the chaos ran Grace Moreno, 22, soaked to the skin, clutching her sketchbook like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her rideshare had canceled halfway to her destination, leaving her stranded in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. She tried calling another, but her phone was dying. The screen cracked, her reflection trembling in the glass. She had one thought: find shelter before the storm swallowed her whole. Her sneakers splashed through puddles as she turned a corner, breath fogging in the cold air. Then she saw it, a soft golden light glowing through the rain. A sign flickered overhead, the Marlowe Lounge. The letters gleamed in gold, elegant and understated, like a secret whispered too close to the ear. Something about the place felt wrong. The building was immaculate: polished wood, dark windows, guarded doors. Black cars lined the curb. No one inside looked like they were escaping the rain. Still, the thunder cracked so loud it made her flinch, and instinct won over hesitation. She pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The music stopped. Laughter froze. The clinking of glasses died midair. Dozens of faces turned toward her. Men in dark suits, women in glittering dresses, all watching the dripping stranger who had just interrupted their perfect order. Grace stood frozen by the door, water pooling beneath her shoes, feeling the heat of every stare. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke and wealth. Velvet booths lined the walls. A crystal chandelier glowed above the bar like a trapped star. She suddenly felt small, out of place, painfully visible. Then she saw him. In the far corner of the room, under the soft amber light, a man sat alone. Luca De Lorenzo. His name was unspoken, yet it hung in the air like a warning everyone understood. His posture was calm, composed, but the kind of calm that could shatter worlds if provoked. The tailored black suit, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the watch that probably cost more than her tuition. He radiated power the way other people breathed, and he was looking directly at her. Grace's pulse hammered against her ribs. There was something in his gaze that felt almost magnetic. Not lust, not curiosity, something heavier. He lifted his glass slowly, eyes never leaving hers, and when he finally spoke, his voice rolled through the silence like thunder's echo. "No one walks into my place by accident." Grace blinked, unsure whether to answer or run. I'm sorry," she stammered. "My car canceled, and I just needed to get out of the storm." Luca tilted his head, studying her. His eyes were sharp, but his tone carried a lazy kind of interest. The way someone might look at a puzzle they didn't know they wanted to solve. "So you crossed half the district in this weather," he murmured. "And this was the door you found." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know what kind of place this was." He smiled, just barely. "Didn't you?" The question wasn't mocking. It was almost intrigued. Still, something about it made her heart kick faster. The air felt charged, as though the storm had followed her inside. Grace's hand tightened around her sketchbook. "I'll leave. I didn't mean to interrupt anything." She turned, but before she could take a step, his voice cut through the silence again. "She stays." The men at the bar hesitated. One leaned closer to him, whispering something. Luca didn't even look his way. He simply repeated quieter this time. "She stays." And that was the end of it. Grace turned back toward him, stunned. "Excuse me?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. "You walked in during a storm," he said softly. "Maybe it's safer if you don't walk back out." Her breath caught. "Safer from what?" He didn't answer. His silence said enough. This wasn't the kind of place where questions earned answers. The room slowly returned to motion, conversations resuming in hushed tones. But Grace could still feel his gaze. Heavy, assessing, unrelenting. She wasn't sure whether he was curious or suspicious. Maybe both. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, painting the marble floor in veins of silver light. Luca rose from his seat. Even the simple act of standing felt deliberate, controlled, like every move had purpose. He walked toward her, unhurried. The scent of smoke and cedar followed him, mixing with the faint metallic tang of rain. When he stopped in front of her, Grace had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. Up close, he looked younger than she expected, maybe 30, but with a weariness in his gaze that belonged to someone twice that age. "You're trembling," he said quietly. "I'm cold," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Or scared," he countered, his tone almost gentle. "Either way, I have a rule. No one leaves this place until I decide they're safe." She swallowed. "That's not your decision to make." A corner of his mouth lifted. "You'd be surprised what decisions I get to make here." They stood there in silence, the storm raging just beyond the glass, two strangers bound by something neither could name. Grace didn't know if it was fear, fascination, or both that rooted her to the spot. Then Luca stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His voice dropped, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Sometimes," he said, "fate doesn't ask for permission. It just walks through the wrong door." Her heart stumbled. Outside, thunder roared again, shaking the windows. Inside, the world felt still, suspended between danger and something darker, deeper. Grace didn't know it yet. But that single moment, a stranger's stare, a storm outside, and a command she didn't understand, had just changed everything. That night, she hadn't found shelter. She'd found the beginning of something she could never escape. The door shut behind Grace with a soft click that sounded too final to be polite. The quiet in the hallway was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of rain beyond the glass windows. A woman dressed in black, impossibly composed, her hair pulled tight, appeared without a word, and gestured for Grace to follow. She moved like a shadow, leading her up a narrow staircase lined with gold-trimmed frames and the faint scent of cigar smoke. The woman stopped before a door at the end of the corridor and opened it. "You can wait here," she said, her tone mechanical, as if it were a script she'd repeated too many times. Then she left, the sound of her heels fading until Grace was alone. The room was beautiful. Too beautiful. Soft lighting, silk curtains, a bed draped in cream linen. On the armchair by the vanity lay a black dress, perfectly tailored, tags still attached. When Grace picked it up, her stomach tightened. It was her exact size. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the fabric trembling in her hands. How could they have known? Had someone measured her with their eyes? Or was this how people like Luca lived? Always 3 steps ahead, even when it came to strangers. She was still gripping the dress when the door opened again. Luca de Lorenzo stepped inside, his presence cutting through the silence like a blade. He'd traded his suit jacket for a black shirt, the sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the lines of muscle beneath. Power without trying, confidence without apology. "You found the clothes," he said, his voice low, casual. They'll fit. Grace turned to face him, jaw tight. That's what worries me. For the first time, a flicker of amusement crossed his features. I'm not in the habit of worrying women, Miss Moreno. You just have a complicated sense of timing. She crossed her arms. Timing? He moved closer, each step measured. You showed up at my club, uninvited, on the night my biggest rival ends up dead. His eyes studied her face, searching for something beneath the surface. You understand why that feels inconvenient, Grace froze. Dead. Luca nodded, slow and deliberate. Paolo Bianchi. He and I had an understanding. Now he's gone. And you, an art student from nowhere, walk into my place drenched in rain and innocence. Forgive me if I find that hard to believe. Her pulse pounded. You think I had something to do with that? I think coincidence is a luxury my world doesn't afford, he replied. Grace took a shaky breath, trying to hold her ground. I told you, I just needed shelter. I didn't even know what this place was. Check my phone, my bag, my ID, you'll see. Luca studied her for a long moment, silent. Then he turned toward the window, watching lightning flash across the skyline. The innocent always believe proof can save them. I'm not part of your world, she said quietly. He turned back to her, his eyes darker than before. No one ever is, until the world decides they are. The words lingered in the air like smoke, soft, dangerous, impossible to escape. Grace swallowed, trying to steady her voice. You can't keep me here, he smiled faintly. You're right. I can't. He walked past her, pausing by the door. But you should stay. For your own safety. My safety from what? Luca glanced at her over his shoulder. From people who think I've already claimed you. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Grace felt her stomach drop, a chill spreading through her chest. Claimed me? She repeated, disbelief and fear tangled in her voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door slightly and called out, Sophia, make sure Miss Moreno has what she needs. No one enters without my say. Then he left, closing the door behind him. Grace stood there motionless, the soft hum of the city filling the emptiness he left behind. Claimed me, she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it less real. She finally changed out of her wet clothes, slipping into the black dress. It fit perfectly, just as he'd said. Too perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror. The fabric hugged her like a second skin, transforming her from a soaked student into someone she didn't recognize. Someone who belonged to his world. Her mind spun. Who was this man really? What kind of life demanded that kind of control? And what had she just stepped into by accident, or fate? She moved toward the window, pressing her palm to the cold glass. Below, the city was a blur of lights and storm water. From this height, she could see her reflection superimposed over the skyline. Small, fragile, trapped. Her phone buzzed weakly on the bedside table, one last flicker of battery. She opened it to see a text from her roommate. You okay? Where are you? Grace typed a quick reply. I'm safe. Staying with a friend. Then she hesitated before hitting send. She deleted friend, replaced it with someone. Then finally changed it again to just, I'm safe. She wasn't sure if it was a lie. The door clicked once more. She turned sharply, but it wasn't Luca this time. Sophia entered quietly, setting a tray on the table, a bowl of soup, a glass of red wine, folded towels. Eat, she said softly, her voice oddly kind. The storm won't last forever. Grace nodded, murmured thanks, and waited for her to leave. When the door shut, she sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the untouched food. The warmth of the room felt suffocating now, the air too still, too careful. She knew what this was. A cage with silk curtains and gold locks. She was safe here, yes, but safety, she realized, could be the most dangerous prison of all. As thunder rolled once more, Grace whispered to herself, What have I walked into? Downstairs, in the dim glow of the lounge, Luca de Lorenzo poured another drink, eyes fixed on the rain streaking the window. His reflection looked back at him, sharp, silent, and uncertain. Somewhere deep inside, even he wasn't sure whether he'd just taken a hostage, Or found something he didn't know he'd been looking for. Morning came softly, almost pretending the night before hadn't happened. Thin light spilled through the curtains, painting the room in shades of pale gold. The rain had stopped, but the city outside still glistened, wet, cold, and quiet. Grace stirred awake, her heart racing before her mind caught up. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The silk sheets, the scent of cedar, the hum of distant traffic. It all felt unreal, like waking inside someone else's life. Then she saw the black dress draped over the chair, and everything rushed back. The storm, the club, the man who said she stays. The door opened with a soft knock that didn't wait for permission. Luca De Lorenzo stepped inside, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked different in the morning light, less like a king and more like a man. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, the top button undone, revealing a silver chain at his collarbone. "Good morning," he said calmly, setting 1 cup on the table beside her. "You take sugar?" Grace blinked, still trying to find her voice. "You're making small talk now?" He smiled faintly. "You looked like you could use something normal." "I could use a door that unlocks," she muttered. Luca didn't answer. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, watching her carefully. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, as if he was waiting for her to make the first move. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat calm her trembling fingers. "So what happens now?" she asked. "That depends," Luca replied, "on whether you plan to keep pretending last night was an accident." Her eyes narrowed. "It was an accident. Maybe," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Or maybe it was timing." She sighed, setting the cup down harder than she meant to. "Do you always talk like that? Like every word is a warning wrapped in poetry?" That made him laugh softly. It was the first sound from him that didn't feel like a threat. "You have a sharp tongue for someone who spent the night locked in my room. And you have an ego big enough for this whole city," she shot back. The corner of his mouth curved, but there was something thoughtful behind his amusement. "You're not afraid of me." "I didn't say that." "No," he said quietly. "But you should be." For a long moment, the air between them held its breath. Then he stood and moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside. From where she sat, Grace could see the skyline, Chicago stretching endlessly beneath a gray morning haze. "My family's been here for 3 generations, he said, his voice shifting, slower, more reflective. "We built this city's bones, bricks, docks, shipping lines. And for that, we paid with blood. Every favor, every piece of ground we owned came at a cost." Grace watched him, unsure if he was confessing or just thinking aloud. "You mean the mafia," she said quietly. He turned his head, not denying it. "That's what they call us. My father called it the business." His gaze drifted back to the window. He believed loyalty was worth more than money, but loyalty built on fear doesn't last forever. Something in his tone softened, almost regretful. "What about you?" she asked carefully. "What do you believe in?" Luca looked over his shoulder at her, the faint light catching in his eyes. "In changing things," he said simply. "In finding a way to make all this," he gestured to the world beyond the window, "mean something better than it used to." She frowned, curious despite herself. "Better how?" "I've been moving our operations toward legitimate work. Construction, shipping contracts, real estate. We have the resources to build something real now, something legal." "And the people who like the old way?" "They don't." His jaw tightened. "They see me as a traitor. To them, blood and power are the only languages worth speaking." Grace studied him quietly. There was a heaviness to him that didn't match the rumors, the way he carried guilt like it was part of his wardrobe. He wasn't what she expected from a man like him. "Dangerous, yes, but not hollow. You talk about change," she said softly, "but you still threaten people, lock them in rooms, and call that protection." Luca exhaled through his nose, not angry, but almost tired. "You think I want to be this? That I enjoy giving orders and watching people obey because they're afraid?" He shook his head. "Power isn't freedom, Grace. It's a leash with a prettier collar." Her heart skipped. The way he said her name, soft, deliberate, made it sound like something sacred. She tried to look away, but his eyes pulled her back in. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you walked into it," he said simply. "And now, you're in the middle of something that doesn't forgive accidents." She met his gaze, defiant but trembling inside. "Then maybe I'll find my own way out." Luca took a step closer, the light shifting across his face. "You shouldn't have walked into my life, Grace," he said quietly, almost like an apology. "Now you're part of something you can't unsee." Her breath caught. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Stay close today. My people will make sure no one bothers you." Grace stared after him, unsure whether to thank him or scream. "You talk like you own everything around you," she said finally. He looked back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "No," he said. "I just understand what it costs." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee, the echo of his words, and a growing sense that the man she'd met in the storm wasn't a villain or a savior. He was both. Grace sat there, staring at the untouched cup on the table, trying to convince herself that what she saw in his eyes was just curiosity, not connection. But deep down, she already knew. Something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just a stranger who stumbled into his world anymore. She was trapped inside it, and part of her wasn't sure she wanted to escape. The rain had returned to Chicago, fierce and unrelenting, hammering against the glass walls of Luca's penthouse. Grace stood by the window, watching streaks of lightning flash across the sky like cracks in the world itself. She had learned to live with the silence here, the kind that hummed beneath the surface, full of secrets no one dared to name. But that night the silence broke. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Unknown number. One message. We have your friend. Tell Luca to pull out of the harbor deal or she dies." Grace's heart stopped. Her hands trembled as she read it again, every word burning into her mind. Your friend. There was only one person it could be. Emily, her roommate, her only real connection to the life she used to have. She turned, her voice shaking. "Luca!" He was in the next room, talking quietly with two of his men. The look on his face when he saw her said he already knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Grace handed him the phone. He read the message once, and his expression hardened instantly, all trace of warmth gone. The man she'd grown to understand over the past weeks vanished, replaced by the cold, decisive figure who ruled a city's underworld. "Who has her?" she demanded. He exhaled slowly, jaw tight. "My enemies. The harbor deal is worth millions when in control. They think using you will make me bend. Then we have to do something." "We will," he said. His tone was low, measured, the kind of calm that comes before violence. He turned to one of his men. "Find out which crew has her. I want a location within the hour." Grace grabbed his arm. "I'm coming with you." He looked at her sharply. "No, you're not. I'm not staying here while she's in danger." "Grace, this isn't your fight." "It is now," she snapped. "Because of me, she's involved. You said this world doesn't forgive accidents. Then stop pretending I'm still outside of it." For a long moment, they stared at each other, her eyes filled with fear and determination, his with something heavier, protective, conflicted. Then finally he nodded. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say." "Understand?" She nodded, her pulse pounding. The black SUV tore through the rain-slicked streets, headlights cutting through sheets of water. Grace sat in the back seat beside Luca, her hands clenched, her heart beating too fast. The men in front loaded weapons in silence, the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this too many times before. Luca leaned forward, voice low as he gave orders. "They're holding her in a warehouse near the riverfront. Old shipping district, east side. 2 entrances, probably 6 men inside. We go in quiet until we can't." He glanced at Grace. "You stay behind me. Always behind me." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes, fierce, absolute, kept her silent. The SUV stopped near the edge of the docks. Rain pounded the metal roof. In the distance, the old warehouse loomed. Broken windows, flickering lights, the smell of oil and rust thick in the air. Luca turned to her one last time. You still have a chance to walk away. Grace met his gaze. Not without her. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Admiration, maybe, or fear for her. Then he opened the door. Stay close. They moved through the storm, boots splashing through puddles, shadows cutting through the night. Luca's men spread out in practiced formation. The sound of the river mixed with the rain. The metallic creak of the building echoing in the distance. Inside, the warehouse was half dark. Stacks of crates, broken machinery, and the faint hum of a generator. Grace's breath came in shallow bursts. Somewhere deeper inside, she heard a voice, muffled, terrified. Emily. Luca motioned for silence. He gestured toward the upper walkway. 2 guards stood there talking, unaware of what was coming. In one smooth motion, Luca raised his gun and fired. 2 clean shots. The men dropped instantly. Grace flinched but couldn't look away. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't. Not when Emily's life depended on this. They moved forward step by step until a door creaked open at the far end. A man appeared, dragging Emily by the arm. Her face was bruised, her wrists tied. Luca stepped into the open, voice cold as steel. Let her go, the man laughed, pressing a gun to Emily's head. Walk away, De Lorenzo. You know the deal. Here's mine, Luca said. You have 10 seconds to live. Before the man could respond, chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air, the room filled with smoke and screams. Grace ducked behind a crate as bullets tore through the metal walls. Luca moved like lightning, imprecise, deadly. Every shot he fired found its mark. Through the haze, Grace saw Emily collapse as her captor fell beside her. Without thinking, Grace ran forward. Emily? Grace, no. Luca shouted, but it was too late. Another gunman appeared from the shadows, rifle raised. The muzzle flash lit the room like fire, and Luca threw himself between them. The shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Grace screamed. Luca fired back, the last man dropping instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the sound of rain and Grace's ragged breathing filled the space. She dropped beside Luca, her hands shaking. You're hit. It's nothing, he muttered, gripping his arm where blood soaked through his sleeve. Just a graze. Emily stirred, whispering weakly. Grace? It's okay, Grace said, her voice trembling. You're safe now. Luca stood, wincing, and offered Grace his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. His palm was warm despite the rain, his touch grounding her in the chaos. Outside, the sirens in the distance mixed with the rumble of thunder. The city never stopped bleeding. As they reached the SUV, Grace looked at the blood on her fingers. His blood, smeared against her skin. Her heart ached with something she couldn't explain. The man she'd once feared. The man everyone whispered about. He was the one who had risked everything to protect her. And for the first time, she realized that the darkness she'd been running from was the only place she'd ever truly felt safe. Days turned into weeks, and the city outside Luca's penthouse blurred into a distant hum. From up here, the chaos of Chicago looked small, like a painting behind glass. Beautiful but unreachable. Grace had stopped asking when she could leave. Somewhere between fear and familiarity, the walls that once felt like a cage had started to feel like shelter. Her life followed a strange rhythm now. Quiet mornings filled with the sound of espresso brewing, afternoons sketching by the floor-to-ceiling windows, and nights where the air pulsed with tension every time Luca walked through the door. She wasn't sure if she was adapting or surrendering, but either way, she'd stopped pretending she didn't care. That morning, the sky was soft with fog. Grace sat by the window, sketchbook in her lap, pencil tracing the outline of the skyline. She didn't notice Luca watching her from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a rare calm in his movements. He approached quietly and set a cup of coffee beside her. You draw the city every day, he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful, but never the people in it. Grace smiled faintly without looking up. The city doesn't argue with me. People do, he chuckled. You make it sound like I'm one of them. She turned to meet his gaze. You're harder to draw than a city, Luca. He raised an eyebrow. Too many sharp edges? Too many sides, she said simply. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned against the window frame, eyes drifting toward the horizon. My father used to say a man can't change his shape. Once you're carved by the world, that's who you are. Do you believe that? He hesitated. I used to. There was something fragile in his tone, a crack in the armor he never let anyone see. Grace closed her sketchbook and turned toward him fully. What changed? You did, he said softly. She froze. He didn't look at her when he said it, but the weight of the words hung between them like smoke. Luca exhaled, as if forcing himself to continue. You know what it's like to wake up every day wondering if you'll make it to the next? That's what this life is. Deals, threats, debts, it never ends. I've lived in the shadows my whole life, Grace. You make me wonder what the light feels like. Her breath caught. The vulnerability in his voice stripped away the legend of who he was, the feared, untouchable De Lorenzo. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the reputation. Then step into it, she whispered. He turned to her, eyes searching hers as if testing whether she meant it. It's not that easy. The light doesn't forgive, Grace. It burns away everything you've built in the dark. Maybe that's what it's meant to do. He studied her quietly, then smiled, not his usual cold. Practice smile, but something gentler. You really believe people can start over, don't you? I have to, she said. Otherwise, what's the point of art, or love? Luca's gaze lingered on her face for a long moment, as though trying to memorize every detail. Then, almost unconsciously, he reached out and brushed his thumb across her hand. The touch was tentative, careful, like he was afraid she might vanish if he pressed too hard. Tell me something, he said. Before all this and before me, what did you want? Grace hesitated, then smiled. I wanted to open a community art center, a place where kids who can't afford school could still create, still feel seen. My mom used to say art saves the parts of us life tries to break. He tilted his head. That sounds like something worth building. I still plan to, she said, though her tone carried a quiet uncertainty. Luca stepped closer. Then I'll help you. Her eyes widened. You can't buy redemption, Luca. His jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his voice, only a quiet ache. Maybe not, but I can build something that isn't made from fear. For a while, neither spoke. The city stretched beneath them, alive with light and movement. Grace felt the warmth of his nearness, the pull of something she couldn't fight. When she finally met his gaze again, the world outside faded. You're dangerous, she murmured. I know, he said softly. But not to you. Her pulse fluttered, betraying her. He reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You shouldn't be here, he said, though his voice betrayed no conviction. Then tell me to leave. He didn't. Instead, his hand lingered by her cheek, his touch hesitant, reverent. The air between them was thick, a tension that felt equal parts fire and gravity. Then slowly he closed the distance and kissed her. It wasn't hurried or hungry. It was cautious, as if he'd forgotten what gentleness felt like and was trying to remember. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were darker, conflicted. This shouldn't happen, he murmured. Maybe, she said softly, but it already did. He looked at her for a long time, something like defeat flickering behind his gaze. You're going to ruin me, Grace, she smiled faintly. Maybe I'll save you instead. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Not the storm that destroys, but the one that reminds you how alive the air can be before the rain. Luca turned toward the window again, his reflection split against the city lights, half in shadow, half in glow. He didn't know which part of himself she saw, or which part she was saving. But for the first time in years, he wanted to believe there was more than darkness waiting for him. And as Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, neither spoke, because for now, between two worlds, silence was safer than hope. The world had grown quieter around Luca and Grace in the weeks that followed. For the first time, peace felt almost real. The deals slowed, the threats faded, and the penthouse, once a fortress of shadows, felt almost like home. Grace started painting again. Luca spent his mornings reading reports instead of issuing orders. And at night, they would share wine on the balcony, where the city lights stretched endlessly beneath them, like a promise neither dared to believe. But in Luca's world, peace was never a gift. It was a distraction, and distractions were deadly. Isabella Rossi had been by Luca's side for years. She was his assistant, his confidant, the one person who'd been there through every rise and fall. Efficient, loyal, and coldly beautiful. The kind of woman who knew how to navigate power and the men who wielded it. But lately, something inside her had begun to rot. Every time she saw Grace in Luca's office, saw the way his voice softened when he said her name, something twisted inside her chest. He was changing. For her. And Isabella couldn't stand it. That night, as the city buzzed beneath the glow of midnight, Isabella sat alone in her apartment, staring at the encrypted files on her laptop, financial records, shipping routes, names that weren't supposed to exist outside Luca's circle. She'd memorized every one of them over the years, and now she sent them, all of them, to a contact she shouldn't have had. "This is what you wanted," she typed, "but leave him alive." The reply came almost instantly. No promises. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of distant sirens. Luca wasn't beside her. His half of the bed was cold. She walked out to the balcony and saw him below, standing with two of his men, talking in hushed tones. Something was wrong. She could feel it. When he came back inside, his jaw was tight, his voice sharp. "We need to move meetings to the South Docks. Someone leaked intel." Grace frowned. "What kind of intel?" "The kind that gets people killed," he said. Then, softer, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." But the way his eyes lingered on her, too long, too heavy, told her he was already preparing for the worst. The ambush came that evening. Luca and Grace were on their way to the docks in his car, the streets wet from rain, the city lights blurring through the windshield. He'd been unusually quiet the whole drive. She reached out, placing her hand on his. "You think it's someone close, don't you?" He didn't look at her. "If it is, I'll deal with it." A moment later, the world exploded. The first blast hit the car from the left, a thunderclap of fire and glass. The vehicle spun violently, metal twisting, windows shattering. Grace screamed as the air filled with smoke and the smell of gasoline. Luca pulled her down, shielding her as another explosion tore through the street. Gunfire followed, sharp, merciless. Shadows moved through the smoke. Luca pushed open the crumpled door and dragged Grace behind the wreckage. Blood ran down his temple, but his focus was razor sharp. "Stay down," he barked. She clung to his arm, her ears ringing, her body shaking uncontrollably. She could barely see through the smoke, only the flash of gunfire lighting fragments of his face. Determined, furious, alive. One of his men shouted something before collapsing. Another returned fire. The street became chaos, sirens in the distance, rain hissing on the flames. Then Grace felt it. A burning pain slicing through her shoulder. She gasped, stumbling back. "Grace!" Luca turned, his voice breaking in a way she'd never heard before. He caught her as she fell, pulling her into his arms, pressing his hand against the wound. "Stay with me," he whispered, his breath ragged. "Don't you dare close your eyes." She could barely hear him over the ringing in her ears. "You're bleeding too," she murmured weakly. "I don't care," he said. "You're not leaving me. Not you." He shouted orders into his radio, his voice shaking with fury. Within minutes, more cars screeched into the street, his men flooding in, chasing the attackers into the dark. Luca didn't move. He just held her. His blood mixed with hers, the rain washing both away. The next thing Grace remembered was the white blur of hospital lights. Her shoulder burned, wrapped in gauze. Machines beeped softly beside her. When she turned her head, she saw Luca sitting in the chair by her bed, his shirt stained crimson, his hands still trembling. He looked older, Not in years, but in weight, like the night had carved something out of him. "You should be resting," she whispered. He lifted his gaze. His eyes were red, hollow. "You almost died because of me." Grace tried to smile. "But I didn't." He shook his head, staring at the floor. "I swore I'd keep you safe. And now—" His voice broke. He clenched his fists, blood still crusted under his nails. "Every time I try to fix this life, it drags me deeper. Everyone around me pays for it." "You're wrong," she said softly. "You saved me." He looked at her, pain flickering behind his eyes. "You keep saying that. But what if next time I can't?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but every word hit him like a blow. "You keep saving everyone, Luca. Who's going to save you?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, breathing unevenly, eyes glistening in the sterile light. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand, careful, as if she might break. For once, the man who commanded empires looked small, human. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe no one can." Grace squeezed his hand, her thumb brushing the back of his knuckles. "Then maybe it's time you stop standing alone." Luca looked at her for a long moment, silent. And though he didn't say it, something in his eyes changed. A quiet surrender. A promise he wasn't ready to speak aloud. Outside, the storm began again, tapping gently against the window. The city never slept, and neither did its ghosts. But for the first time, Luca held on, not to power, not to vengeance, but to her. The months that followed the hospital were quieter, not peaceful but deliberate. Luca De Lorenzo was a man rebuilt from ruin. The bullet wounds healed, but the guilt lingered like smoke that refused to fade. He stopped attending late-night meetings. The phone calls at 3 a.m. ended. His empire, the web of men, money, and fear that once defined him, began to unravel, piece by piece, under his own orders. Grace watched it happen in silence. Some nights, she'd wake to find him staring out over the city, lost in thought, hands buried in his pockets, the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders. When she asked what he was thinking, his answer was always the same. About what comes next. And then one morning, he told her, "I'm done," he said, sitting across from her at the breakfast table, his tone calm but unshakable. "No more blood. No more power games. I'm dissolving everything." Grace froze. "You mean the organization?" "I mean all of it." He leaned back, eyes steady. "I've spent my whole life building something that only destroys. It's time to build something that creates instead." "What will you do?" she asked. Luca smiled faintly, the first genuine smile she'd seen in weeks. "Something real. Something good." 2 months later, the Haven Project was born. It began as an idea, a foundation that would combine Luca's legitimate businesses with Grace's vision of art and community. A place for rebuilding, both the city's broken corners and the people lost inside them. Grace became its public face, the artist, the dreamer, the woman who'd turned a mafia boss into a philanthropist. Reporters called her the light behind the Haven. She hated the title, but Luca only smiled. "Let them call it what they want," he told her. "We know what it really is." Their partnership became more than business. Wherever Luca went, Grace was there. On construction sites, in press meetings, in classrooms where kids painted over cracked walls with color and hope. Slowly, the city began to see them not as scandal, but as a strange kind of salvation. But light always casts a shadow. The old guard, men who had once sworn loyalty to Luca, watched from the dark with fury in their eyes. To them, he was no longer their leader. He was a traitor, a man who'd traded legacy for redemption. The whispers grew louder. "He's gone soft. He's turned his back on us." And in the underworld, betrayal had only one price. The night before the launch ceremony, Grace found Luca alone in the penthouse office. The room was dim, the city lights flickering below like restless stars. Papers were spread across his desk, architectural drafts, press notes, security reports. But his eyes weren't on them. "You're thinking again," she said softly. He looked up, tired but smiling. "You sound like my conscience." "Maybe I am." She walked closer, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You're worried about tomorrow," he sighed, nodding. "We'll have press, politicians, investors. Every camera in the city pointed at us. It's the perfect moment for them to strike." Grace knelt beside him, meeting his gaze. "Then don't let them win. You've spent your whole life surviving their world. Now live for yours." Luca brushed his thumb along her cheek, his voice low. "You still believe in me?" "Always," she said simply. Something in his chest broke open, the wall that had kept him from hope. "Then maybe that's enough." The next day, the ballroom of the Grand Chicago Hotel shimmered with light. Reporters filled the aisles. Photographers lined the entrance. The Haven Project banners hung from the marble walls, elegant and simple. "Building tomorrow from the ashes of yesterday." Luca stood near the stage in a black suit, his presence calm but commanding. Grace stood beside him, radiant in a white dress, her hand gently resting in his. To the world, they looked untouchable, the reformed king and the woman who tamed him. Flashbulbs exploded as they walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. Luca stepped to the microphone, scanning the crowd. "For years," he began, his voice steady, "I built walls instead of bridges. I believed control was safety. But the truth is, it was fear, and fear builds nothing worth keeping." He looked at Grace, his expression softening. "This project is not about me. It's about what comes after me. What we build when we stop running from the light." Grace stepped forward, her voice warm, clear. "Art saves the parts of us that life tries to break. This city has seen enough pain. It's time we create something beautiful from it." Applause filled the hall. Thunderous, genuine. For the first time, Luca allowed himself to breathe. But from the shadows of the balcony, a pair of eyes watched through the scope of a rifle. Isabella Rossi, the woman who once stood beside him, now stood against him. Her expression was unreadable. Regret flickered briefly, then disappeared beneath resolve. "Goodbye, Luca," she whispered. A flash of light. A single gunshot tore through the applause. Screams erupted. Chaos spread like wildfire. Grace froze, the sound still echoing as Luca grabbed her, pulling her to the ground. Security swarmed, shouts blending into panic. Luca's shoulder burned, a sharp, searing pain. But he didn't stop. He shielded Grace with his body until the room was clear, sirens wailing outside. When it was over, she turned to him, eyes wide with tears. "You're hit," he smiled weakly. "Just a reminder that the past doesn't die easy." "You could have died," she whispered, voice breaking. He touched her face, his blood warm against her skin. "If this is the price for starting over," he said softly, "then it's worth it." Tears blurred her vision. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said with a faint smile. "But you're the reason I finally want to live." The cameras still flashed in the chaos, catching the moment, the blood on his suit, the hand he refused to let go of, the two of them standing in the wreckage of both their worlds. And in that shattered silence, Luca De Lorenzo, the man who once ruled the city's shadows, rose again. Not as a criminal, not as a ghost, but as a man reborn in the fire of his own redemption. The applause from the Haven Project Gala still echoed in Grace's mind hours later. The city had seen Luca De Lorenzo reborn, no longer the ghost of the underworld, but a man trying to build something that mattered. The press called it redemption. Grace called it hope. Yet beneath the lights and champagne, she felt it, that thin wire of tension that never left his world. The look in Luca's eyes that night wasn't triumph. It was farewell. They left the ballroom together under a rain of camera flashes, his hand warm in hers, his smile calm but distant. "You did it," she whispered, as they stepped into the car. "We did it," he almost said, but instead his gaze drifted toward the city skyline. Freedom always costs something, he murmured. The question is what you're willing to pay for it. It was the last thing she remembered before everything went black. The explosion shattered the quiet of the night. A flash of fire, the sound of tearing metal, then silence. Grace woke hours later to the sterile hum of hospital lights, her arm bandaged, her body aching. The smell of antiseptic replaced the scent of smoke and blood. Her first word was his name. Luca? No one answered. When she tried to sit up, a nurse rushed in, pressing her gently back down. You need to rest, the woman said softly. Where is he? The nurse hesitated. They didn't find a body. Grace's heart dropped. No, you're wrong. He's alive. He has to be. But all she got was silence, the kind that meant pity, not truth. For weeks she searched. Police reports, private contacts, even whispers from the corners of Luca's old world. Some said he'd died in the blast. Others claimed he'd disappeared, leaving everything behind. The organization, the money, even her. But Grace knew better. Luca De Lorenzo didn't run, not unless it was the only way to protect someone he loved. Still, as months passed, even belief began to ache. She returned to her small apartment, the one she'd left behind when she first stepped into his storm. The penthouse stood empty, sealed under investigation. His name faded from the headlines. Life moved on, except hers. A year later, Chicago was alive with spring again. The city had rebuilt, and so had she, piece by fragile piece. Grace's art had found its voice again, deeper than before. Raw, imperfect, human. Her first solo exhibition opened at a downtown gallery under a name that made people pause. Beauty in Ruins. The walls were lined with oil and charcoal, twisted steel bathed in light, shattered glass catching reflections of color, faces hidden behind smoke and hope. It was a love letter to everything that had broken her, and the man who had taught her that even broken things could still protect. The gallery was full that night. Reporters, critics, students. But Grace barely noticed them. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, her eyes drawn again and again to the final piece at the end of the hall. It was a painting of a city at dawn, half in shadow, half in gold. And standing between the two, a silhouette she'd painted from memory. Is that him? A journalist asked softly. Grace smiled, though her eyes glistened. It's what's left of him. The night wound down slowly. One by one, the guests drifted out until only Grace remained, sitting on the gallery steps with her heels in her hand, exhaustion and peace tangled in her chest. That's when she saw it, a small, unmarked envelope on the reception counter. No postage, no name, just her. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, the mural she'd painted on the wall of the Haven Project, the one that had been destroyed in the explosion. But this photo was new. The mural had been repainted, every stroke identical, and beneath it, written in black ink, even shadows deserve a second chance. Grace's breath caught. She pressed the photo to her chest, eyes burning. For a moment she felt the weight of him again, his hand on hers, his voice steady in the dark. Luca, she whispered. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, familiar, almost merciful. She stepped out into it, her face tilted toward the sky. The city lights blurred through her tears, turning the world into color and water. He was out there somewhere, alive, watching, keeping the promise he'd never had the chance to speak aloud. Grace smiled through the ache, the kind of smile born from heartbreak and faith colliding. Then keep your second chance, she murmured. Just don't waste it. The rain thickened, soaking through her dress, but she didn't move. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine hummed, faint and fleeting, gone before she could turn. She didn't chase it. She didn't need to, because love, she realized, wasn't always about staying. Sometimes it was about surviving, about carrying the light someone left behind until they found their way back to it. And as the gallery lights dimmed behind her, Grace stood beneath the rain, smiling, crying, free, knowing that even if she never saw Luca again, his shadow would always walk beside her. After all, some love stories aren't meant to end. They just change shape, like ashes carried on the wind. Thank you so much for listening to the story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories. Your support means the world to me and keeps me inspired to create even more for you.